Like, I really consider it a privilege. The reality is that I get to help walk these families through what is one of the most emotional parts of their life and stressful. And so I do take it, just like I did with teaching, as a privilege.
Meet our next guest who successfully pivoted from a 17-year teaching career into her next endeavor with great success. Find out how she did it in this episode. It's all part of our summer series of teachers pivoting into other careers. And it all starts now.
Welcome to 85 After School. I'm your host, Nicole, and this is the podcast about teacher career and retirement planning through real-life stories of those who live it. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Anuja, and I know that you have lots to share with our listeners today in relation to your pivot from teaching to an entrepreneur and a successful real estate agent. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Thank you so much for having me. It's really nice to be here.
And I want to take you back, because you were in the education system for quite a long time, but I want to take you back. What led you to decide to become a teacher in the first place?
That's a good question. I can probably think of a number of points in my life growing up where I was pretty sure this may be the career for me. Until I really decided to become a teacher, it was always sort of in the back of my mind. And I think, I had some really great teachers growing up, a few that I can just think of off the top of my head, particularly in high school. I loved high school. I was student council president. I played sports. I just loved the atmosphere. And I had a really important teacher in my life at that time. And she was just so supportive of me through those really pivotal years. And so she was one of the reasons. And I think it was just something similar. It really aligned with my skill set. It is aligned with my desire to be around people. And anytime I had knowledge about something, I loved sharing it. I was very active with social causes when I was in high school. So it was just a really special time. And I think there's some of us who are just really well suited for it. My eldest daughter is a perfect example. She's only 10, but I can already see that it is something that she would do well at.
I think it's also when you're inspired by somebody who teaches well, and not necessarily by top down telling you all the information, but really making you curious and want to engage in being a lifelong learner. Those are the ones that spark you into wanting to pursue perhaps a teaching career.
Yeah. And I think it was the other things that teachers do that was really the pull for me. I loved the academic teaching aspect of it, but Toby is her name, who was that teacher who I'm talking about. She was a support to me in so many other ways. And it's funny that I ended up in student success roles. I ended up in alternative education, those other academic things that we do as teachers, particularly in the high school, well, all levels, but for me, it was high school. The emotional support, the resource sharing, the, being that resource for people when they needed it. It was just a privilege to be able to do that. And I think that's what really drew me to the career in the first place.
And you enjoyed quite a long career in the teaching profession. Your colleagues loved working with you. I knew you from your own podcast in that sense, and you've done a couple of those as well. But there did come a time where you felt a different calling. Can you maybe describe the events that led to you to contemplate leaving the teaching profession?
Well, if you had asked me a couple of years before I left teaching if I was ever leaving teaching, it would have been an absolute no, right? There was no world in which I was ever leaving. And part of that is because I don't know if I really ever considered that I could, if that makes any sense. It felt like I was very locked into what I was doing. Part of that was, I think, related to seniority. Part of that's related to the pension. I was just very focused on what could I do within the teaching career. So I had done my PQP to become an administrator. So I was probably 8 or 9 years into my teaching career right before I had my first child. And, I was very clear on what I wanted to do. Early in my career, I imagined being a VP, a principal, a superintendent. I wanted to do it all. I was very excited about going deep into teaching. And so, like I said, if you had asked me just a year or 2 or 3 before I left teaching, if I ever planned on it, the answer would have been a hard no. What happened was, at the time, I was a department head in Peel in the public board. I was focused on equity work. So in 2020, I got hired in March of 2020 to Central Peel, a high school in Brampton, to be their equity lead. And I was so excited. It was something I was really passionate about. I was doing student success also. And so I moved over to Central Peel, and days after I got hired, we got locked down. And so I moved into that new career, or that new position at a new school in a headship role where I didn't know anyone at the school during COVID. And that's not to say that's the reason I left teaching. It's not at all. But what I did find is there were a couple of events that happened during COVID, during those years, that I started to feel like maybe becoming a vice principal was no longer what I wanted to do. I started to feel like the politics of the career, of administration, of leadership within schools was something that I had 2 kids at the time now. They were young. I was focused on that, and I'm no longer going to pursue this path. It no longer felt like something I was as passionate about, as driven towards. And, the additional compensation monetarily was not going to be enough. It's not a lot. And the added responsibility, the added pressures, the added politics, and dealing with staff became really onerous. And I became a little bit, I don't know if disconcerted is the word, I became a little bit skeptical of my role and what was happening in the system, particularly in Peel. We had just gone through a ministry review. A lot of things were changing. And so I decided during COVID that I was no longer going to pursue a principalship. And so, what it opened up, I'd been a real estate investor with my husband for, the previous 10 or 12 years. And, I'd always wanted to become a real estate agent. It was one of those things that I didn't do because I don't think my parents would have been as excited about it had I done that out of university. I come from a South Asian household where, there's certain careers that are acceptable, and real estate agents are not one of them. So, I never actually considered I could do it. And so then I decided I would just do it for the sake of my husband and I investing, right? We would just buy our own places. I wouldn't have to go through a real estate agent. And so I started doing the courses, and I remember quickly into it, I looked at my husband and I said, I think I want to do this for real. And what I meant by that is that I actually wanted to be other people's real estate agent as well. It really stimulated in me something that I was really excited about. And so the plan at the time was to do both. I was going to teach during the day. I was going to be a real estate agent after hours, and I was going to do both at the same time because it was going to be slow and I could do both. And so that was really the plan at the beginning. And then things picked up. And so I guess that's a really long way of describing what happened, is that it just became like an option to do both at the same time. And then I got so busy in real estate that it no longer was sustainable.
I love that. Life is short. Pursue what you are passionate about. And if you can make it a reality, this is the time to jump in. And people would say, like, just what you were highlighting, I'm scared. I got the pension. I got this many years in. I'm on a trajectory. I just got this promotion. But to see you smile and talk about what you pivoted to is just amazing. And I can feel that this is where your energy needs to be. So you talked a little bit about taking courses and preparing yourself. You had already had that background being a real estate investor. What steps did you take in preparation for leaving the teaching profession then?
Yeah. Well, the biggest thing at the beginning, and probably part of the reason I thought about doing both, I don't know if I always imagined I would do both. I think still at the beginning, I thought I'm going to be a teacher till I retire, right? I was 17 years in, I'm in my 40s at the time. I'm like really thinking, I'm going to make it to the end, right? I got, 13. I can't remember what my date was anymore, but, I had like just over 10 years left in the bank, and, I'll just do this and grind for the next 10 years and do both. And I'm going to get that pension, that golden handcuff thing at the end. I'm going to get there. So I was doing obviously I had to get registered in Ontario to be a realtor. So I was doing those courses, obviously. Some other things I did were lining up and shadowing with someone within my brokerage. It's the reason I picked my brokerage, actually. I planned on shadowing someone. I made a lot of phone calls to people who were in the real estate profession, some who were teachers, most who weren't, the contacts, and really started to get an understanding of what was going on. It was also a really interesting time in the real estate market at the time. Things were very heightened. And so there was a lot happening. And I didn't think it was going to be a quick and easy, like I'm just going to be $1 million agent very quickly. It wasn't that. It was just more trying to understand what I needed to do. I think what worked for me well is that in my first year, there were some people who trusted me because of who I was in my teaching life, in my real life, that trusted me with really large transactions, which I'm indebted to them and thankful for their trust at the time, despite them knowing that I was quite new. That allowed me to fund my first year off. And so I took a 1-year leave, a self-paid leave in 2022. I took a one-year leave, and that gave me some room to say, okay, I've funded it with what I've done so far. And so I can afford it, even if I do no deals in this year, like at least let me try this full time. And so that first year leave that I took self-funded was really good for me. I think though, to be honest, it was like September 6th or something. And I looked at my husband, I said, I don't think and I couldn't even finish my sentence. And he said, you're not going back. He knew already within days of the school year starting, the kids had gone back to school. I was getting busy with the fall market. And within days, he's like, Anuja, there's no way you're going back. Like he knew before I did. And he was a really big supporter. I was very scared. I remember looking at him and saying like, David, like, what if I don't do well? What if this is a bad choice to like leave the security and the predictability of this fantastic career, which I still loved at the time. I never lost my love of teaching. It was that I had an opportunity to do something different. Again, early 40s, 2 small kids, like the excitement I felt about digging into something new where I had full autonomy and full range of what I could do with this career was like so exciting, because teaching is the box, a really good box. It served me well. I never undermined what it did for me in my life, what opportunities it gave me. I never underestimate that, but I was boxed, right? I was boxed in terms of time. I was boxed in terms of potential income. I was boxed in terms of the creativity I could bring to the table and the things I could do. I was always limited. And like I said, I still love that box. And it did for me in those years more than I hoped it could. But it was so rejuvenating and exciting to have all these new opportunities that I just never planned on.
What a thrill for you to be able to learn and be excited about that learning, because that's at the root of every good teacher, is that you're a learner at heart and you're doing so well. You're in that flow moment where other people that are close to you can recognize, oh yeah, this is it. This is what makes you tick, and you're enjoying really what you're doing. So it's 3 years now that you have pivoted. You're the founder of Seamless Rightsizing, and it's a full service real estate agency for seniors. Maybe you can explain a little bit now about the work that you're doing.
Sure. One of the things that was exciting about doing something different than teaching, I wasn't excited about leaving teaching, but moving to something new was this creativity option. And I don't own my own brokerage. I own my own business, though, within my brokerage. So I work for Remax. I'm a full-time Remax agent. But a couple of years ago, what I discovered is that I was working with a lot of folks whose parents needed help selling their home. And there was a lot of reasons that happened. Either someone went into a home, someone unfortunately passed away. But there were these circumstances where peers of mine, some teachers actually, our staff from schools, who were like, Anuja, I need help. Like I'm selling this house that they haven't moved for 30 years. They've got all this stuff in there. It was one of those things that I started to find more common. And at the same time, I'll tell a quick story about really what happened is that I was referred to a man named Joe out in Brantford. I went out to see Joe. Joe was 88 years old, had just lost his wife, was living in a 5-level split with bad knees. And Joe was going to move. And I went to see him a couple of times. We talked about the plan. He was getting help packing. He was ready to go. And I went away for a couple of days. And Joe and I had a plan to meet on Tuesday to go see condos in the Brantford area. So I called Joe on Monday after I got back from my trip. And I said, Joe, we have our date tomorrow. I'll pick you up at this time. And he was like, I'm not moving.
Oh.
And I was like, what do you mean you're not moving, Joe? Again, his daughter out in British Columbia, stressed about him, had found me through a contact. Joe got overwhelmed. Joe got like, where am I going? I'm uncomfortable and this is all too much. And so Joe decided not to move. And I talked to his daughter, and she was obviously beside herself because she's out in BC, worried about Joe in the middle, like actually a suburb of Brantford. And she said, he's stubborn. There's nothing you can do, Anuja. And I felt like at that moment I had failed Joe and I had failed his daughter. And not because I have control over all of this, but had I done it a bit differently, maybe Joe would have moved. And to be honest, I think Joe's still in that house years later. And his daughter doesn't know what to do. There's nothing she can do really at this point. And what I felt like is that had I made it easier for Joe, maybe I should have taken Joe to see new places first. Maybe I should have set him up a little more clearly on how I knew I was going to support him, but I'm not sure I told him that. And so I don't know if he knew fully. And I just felt like had I done it a bit more clearly, maybe Joe would not be in that home. And Joe is probably not in a safe place in that home, despite him being able to manage all that, to say that putting those things together, working with these adult children of seniors, that situation with Joe made me really realize that there's a problem here and it needs a solution. And that's where Seamless Rightsizing came out of.
It's the psychology behind the move to another place that often overwhelms. And so you have found a way to work with individuals in order to make the move, that huge transition in their senior years, the most comfortable as possible. I'm wondering, because a lot of that has to do with emotional intelligence and teaching skills. So how did your previous professional work experience support you in supporting the seniors that are moving into different places now?
Oh my gosh, in all ways, Nicole, it is the skills that I learned as a teacher and developed as a teacher. I think some of them, like I said, we come in with some pretty significant skills. A lot of us, I think it's how many good teachers enter the career is because we have some of those skills. I use all of them all the time. I was working with vulnerable youth when I was teaching. I did student success, I did contact, I did all of that stuff. And so I was working with vulnerable youth, and now I'm just working with vulnerable seniors. Truthfully, it is such an overwhelming time for people. The last house I just sold, she hasn't moved yet. She's been in the house for 45 years. Her husband passed away in the fall. And so just being able to be there for her, she doesn't know the changes that have happened in the real estate market. So much has changed in 40 years, right? So not knowing how to navigate the system, not knowing where to start, not knowing what is coming down the pipeline. One of the things that I think I do well with this population is I take a lot of time. I'm very slow at explaining what's in these documents. These are legal documents that, even learning how to DocuSign, right?
Yeah.
That's hard. And so sometimes I have to go in person, which is fine. Sometimes it's understanding there's different compliance for like financial fraud stuff that we have to go through. There's things about multiple offers and how MLS works, and even how people can access information about other sales. There's just so much how showings work. Going through all that really slowly, selling a home is overwhelming at any stage of our lives.
Right.
It's considered one of the most stressed situations in our lives. And so add either being alone and maybe losing a spouse. And so the emotional impact of that. Where am I going to go? How am I going to be supportive? I've been here for 30 years. I know where the grocery store is, where the post office is, where that is. I sat down with this woman the other day and we sat and did her utilities, how to transfer them, because she doesn't know. And going on a computer to do that is or you stay on hold for an hour, it's just so overwhelming. And so if I can just be a support, I really consider it a privilege. I know that sounds hokey, but the reality is that I get to help walk these families through what is one of the most emotional parts of their life and stressful. And so I do take it, just like I did with teaching, as a privilege to be able to walk hand in hand with someone and provide some guidance and make it a little less stressful.
And you're the perfect person to do it just by your patience and your ability to explain, break things down. And there's a huge trust factor in that. I think people are very comfortable with teachers in general. What a great way to merge those skills together into what you're doing now. And I'm sure there's people out there that I want to get a hold of Anuja now because I have parents that need to sell their home. How can we get a hold of you?
Yeah, so Seamless Rightsizing is the organization, is the business I run. info@seamlessrightsizing.ca is my email, or www.seamlessrightsizing.ca is the website. I'm also pretty active on Instagram, and there's a lot of resources on the website. If someone's thinking about whether they're parents, it might be time. I have a guide on there that's a really helpful way to start what sometimes can be a tough conversation. And there's some conversation starters on there. There's some things that may be helpful. I have a checklist for seniors and for adult children, see if it might be time to right size. And so access the resources or reach out. My phone number's on there, and always happy to help. It is such a tough time, not only for seniors, but for adult children. And those family dynamics run deep sometimes. So I'm always happy to be a third party just to see if there's some help with the decision-making process.
That's great. And we'll put all your contact information in the show notes as well. I think your business is going to increase just by the demographics of older parents and having to move. I want to ask a bit of a controversial question for you, because I know you absolutely love what you're doing now and your pathway that has gotten you there. But if you could go back in time with everything you know now, would you have still chosen the same career path?
Yeah, I think I would. I mean, there's sometimes where I think, oh man, I wish I'd started in real estate a couple years ago, but I don't regret it at all. I had such a great time teaching. I learned a lot. I developed who I was as a human. I loved doing what I was doing until the last day that I was in the classroom. I loved it. I coached basketball. I worked with students on committees. I just loved working with high school students. Been inspired as much as I think I'd like to think I maybe inspired one or two along the way. I wouldn't change it. I found it a very supportive career. I think things happened the way they happened. I knew what I knew when I knew it. And I'm so grateful that I worked past the fear. If there's anyone out there who's thinking about maybe making a pivot, I was scared. And I talk a lot about that. I was really concerned that I wasn't going to make it. And I remember my husband was my biggest kick in the butt to make the move. And I'm thankful he could see beyond my fear. But what if things don't go well? And you'll figure it out. You're smart and you can always do something new, right? You'll figure it out. And so if anyone is thinking about it, no matter what that career is, I'm always happy to talk and see what makes sense. It is scary. And so I think it's not all about money. We have pretty modest expectations for our life. I'm happy. I get to go do pizza day at my kid's school and have a slower pace. So I'm really thankful for the way things went.
I'm so envious of you that you said, I took that risk I had people championing around me and I took that risk. You have absolutely no regrets. I can tell that by the way that you're telling your story. And I think because teachers tend to be risk adverse, I mean, they know school, they live school, and then they stay in school. And the security of it is almost, you have to take that plunge and just do it. And you mentioned it a little bit, but I'm wondering what other advice besides lean into your fear, step into it, take that risk. What other advice do you have for teachers who are seriously contemplating leaving the profession?
The one thing that we like to do in this house is a lot of goal setting. When I look ahead at 5, 10, 20 years of what I want our life to look like, there's a lot of ways, like a lot of roads lead to Rome, right? And so really zooming out and getting away from, okay, like, what am I trying to achieve, right? What are we trying, what does it look like for us in 10 years? And is there a different pathway to get there? I think really digging deep on, and I think you mentioned it earlier, is like where my energy is leading me is really important. The other thing that I think is really valuable is trying to find, I think you mentioned Beyond the Bell, which is a podcast I hosted with Dan McMullen. And we've stopped now actually, because we've both sort of gone in slightly different foci in terms of what we're doing. But what that was geared towards was trying to help teachers supplement what might be a retirement fund that isn't going to be enough to support their lifestyle. And so one thing that we always had, and this was helpful for me to be able to make that career pivot, was that we had other streams of income, right? So creating those, especially, I'm glad we started them 15 years ago when we started investing in real estate, but we had these other streams. And so I think we would have needed them whether I was staying in teaching or not, but especially it gave me a little bit more of a cushion to be able to say, well, we bought that investment property that's rented out. If we were really stuck, like if things went really badly for, my husband's an entrepreneur as well, things went really badly for either or both of us, like we have that asset that we had to sell it, we would sell it, right? There would always be food on the table. There would always be roof over our head. And so really trying to find other streams, whether that's tutoring, whether that's a real estate investment, no matter what that is, I think like finding another stream that can help support a lifestyle so that didn't feel as pressured to stay in it, I think is really valuable. I also think really look at what parts of the teaching career you love, right? And I love the people aspect of it. I was a biology history teacher. It wasn't the history that drew me to teaching. It was the working with people. It was being that resource. It was that energy I got from engaging with other humans. By knowing that, I still get to do that, right? It's not that like I've lost that was the part I loved. And so figure out the part you love, what drew you to teaching in the first place, and what other areas are there that you can do. If you love the designing of graphic, like maybe there's some, get on Fiverr and become like someone who can do these side projects. What can bring you energy beyond the bell, I think is why we created that podcast in the first place.
Yeah, and it's a great podcast. And I would encourage any of the listeners to tap into the episodes. You just have to be conscientious of what different sources are going to help your lifestyle of what you're looking for. So great advice. So we've reached the part of the show where I ask our guests to contribute a gem. And since you've pivoted to the successful career from teaching, what is that one piece of wisdom that you want to leave with our listeners today?
I think the one thing I would say is take the action. Take whatever one action that can help propel you towards whatever freedom looks like for you. I think lifestyle freedom is really what I was seeking, and a big part of the reason why I pivoted, right? It was not about the money. It was not about the specific job that I'm doing. It's about the lifestyle freedom that I feel like I have today by making that pivot. And so take that one action, whatever that is, whether it's calling someone in the career that you're thinking about, or how can you add it on to whatever you're doing. I think freedom looks different for everybody, but starting to define that and take one action towards towards whatever that is the best thing I think we can do. Because we can talk a lot, we think a lot. Like you said, we're risk averse. I was too. Taking that leap, even if it's a small step, is a step in the right direction. If it's a step towards freedom, then I highly encourage it.
I love that. And finding someone that can walk that journey with you, if not to be a cheerleader, then to be someone to hold your hand. Anuja, it's been such a great pleasure to speak with you. Congratulations on all your success. And I really appreciate you taking the time to share your wisdom with the listeners today.
Oh, thank you so much, Nicole. And thank you for doing this. I know firsthand the work that goes into this, and you're doing a service that is going to benefit many people along the way. So thank you for doing it and creating this platform.
That's nice of you to say. Thank you so much for your kind words. And thanks again for being here.
Well, that's our show for today. Thanks for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you know when new episodes are uploaded. We'd also love to hear your feedback. Leave a review or connect with us on Instagram or Facebook at 85 After School. Hey, if you're interested in being a guest, be sure to email us directly, 85afterschool@gmail.com. That's 85afterschool@gmail.com. Until the next episode, be good to yourself